worked in video stores, I've worked in movie theaters, I've worked in record shops, and I always feel like the overlap between all of those industries in terms of like how people go in there and sort of have this communal experience. And I think the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about is that communal experience that people get from going to a video store. In a way, the film does make it known that this is sort of like a cultural center. And I was just wondering for you, like going through all the footage that you have for this and creating this essay for it, what your own personal experiences of working in a video store and seeing that communal experience, how that influenced the direction of this.
Well, I mean, there's obviously certain clips in the film that really do recall my memories and my experiences of working at Kim's Video with Michael and others. Um, but like the movie that would represent my experience, doesn't really exist because it would be very undramatic, right? Like you have to remember, like, while a lot of these films, and certainly durationally, my 3 hour movie immerses you in the space of the store for a very long time. You have to remember that with very limited exceptions, where a movie largely takes place in a store or has a character who works there, most of these examples are trying to distill everything about the scene, the store, the space, the location into like 2 to 5 minutes. Whereas that, nothing could less represent the experience of working 40 hours a week in a store, where by and large it's a repetitive routine of doing your job. And I've said, an accurate video store movie would probably have to be structured more like John Dielman than Kevin Smith's Clerks, because it would just be same thing over and over every day. And yeah, I mean, there is no movie that will ever get made that there ever was that represents the person who gets there at 9:30, counts the safe, opens the store, and between 10 when the store opens and noon, it maybe has two customers and is just quietly I have a movie on, I'm watching something I haven't seen, I'm shelving stuff. Like that, there's nothing worth dramatizing about that. So the lived experience of working in a store and the dramatic or comedic experience as rendered in these films and shows that I've highlighted, they're extremely different, to the point that for me, as someone who worked there, these many clips cannot help but seem so detached from reality, except for a few slivers of truth that appear every here and there. But of course, you don't go to the kinds of films that we're showing expecting reality, their action, their horror, their comedy, their romance. That's what you want. They're using the store as a backdrop for genre. They're not creating a completely, obviously Clerks, the film, gets close to that, but it renders the director's personal experiences for absolute comedic absurdity.
Yeah. And even Clerks has to leave the video store every now and then because, I really do feel like a convenience store does have more comedic potential than a video store does. And like a lot of the video store stuff, as you show in the film, is a lot of it is montage, really, of just moments here and there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think this film really conveys really well and why video stores have popped up in so many movies is that particularly during the 80s and 90s during their heyday, they're very visually compelling spaces. To some degree they're almost like sensory overload when you go through like some of the aisles of like a Blockbuster or one of the larger mom and pop stores that have like multiple levels to them and things like that. And I was just wondering for you what it's like to look at these things that they might not be telling the reality of a video store, but it certainly is like always a visually compelling place to set a scene.
Yeah, and that's what I've, even before making this movie and just as a fan, and then certainly 10 years of looking at these clips, like if you're me and if you're most people I know, anytime a scene like this cuts into a store, and this goes for music stores or whatever, but specifically video stores, if you're me, perhaps yourself as well, your eyes are scanning. You're looking everywhere but the characters.
Mhm.
You're suddenly looking at every box on every shelf, and you're saying, "Oh my God, I yeah, like just seeing that big box horror reminds me of like being in the space and seeing the way these posters are used to create this mood or atmosphere within this location." Um, so a fun experience for me was sort of spending all the time on this movie and just like pausing with Clyde Foley, the film's editor, and just once we got these movies in like 4K, we could really see what was on the shelves. And we're like, oh yeah, like look at that. We have that tape. I have that, or like I have that same tape, or we just found that down at our Kim's archive. And and our hope is that by giving people so much time with the movie, by the middle of the film, we've trained viewers to sort of watch the film that way, to start asking questions. And there's so many things in the film that if we wanted to be, I think, slightly more didactic, we could point out. But our hope is an hour into the movie, if you're locked in and if you're the kind of viewer for whom we made the movie, you're noticing all the stuff we want you to notice. You're noticing things we don't say, like in Last Action Hero in the video store, front and center, right behind Schwarzenegger, is a shelf of just John McTiernan films. We're not saying Last Action Hero is made by John McTiernan. We're not pausing it, slowing it down. We considered it. We just hope somebody says, that's weird. There's an entire shelf here that's just Medicine Man, Hunt for Red October. Fun little joke. Director maybe just walked into the set, moved his own movies there. The production designer thought it would be cute. And yeah, we could point that out every time it happens. But we just hope that people start getting onto the wavelength of how I watch movies, which is that way.
Yeah, and that's something that like kind of ties into the next thing that I wanted to bring up was how people can kind of play, particularly with kind of the, you know, safe, sanitized, family-friendly atmosphere of like a blockbuster video, which even in the film there are blockbuster videos and there are places that are clearly blockbuster coded. But I look at something like what you open the film with, which is the scene from Hamlet where he gives the soliloquy in the video store, and it's very clearly a blockbuster. It very clearly has like that look to it, but all of the videos that you see him walking by don't necessarily match up with the section that they belong in. Like there are things in the drama category that are not necessarily drama, things in action that are not necessarily action. And I feel like it's something that the film does well in that it really finds a way to make those kind of corporatized settings into something visually compelling. So, what's it like for you as someone who grew up working in a video store that actually had a major personality, looking at the ways that people deal with these kind of chain stores when they try to adapt it into a visual medium?
Well, you're noticing something that I've noticed many times and that I view as incredibly obvious, which is like, like there's no logic. Some of these places are obviously a location where they went in and they started filming. Serial Mom is filmed at Video American, a Baltimore-based store that John Waters was a customer of. Sometimes you just get the sense that people walked in with a box of 2,000 tapes and just threw them up every which way because, well, A, working backwards, they certainly never assumed someone would be scrutinizing them the way I ended up doing by making this movie in 2K or 4K for 10 years. But, some of these things are just broadcast on TV. So there's no thinking of like, why are these things here? There's just the thinking of like, no one's going to be looking at this. And they're right, except somebody like me gets their hands on the material a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades later. There's a couple examples of what you're describing that I'm incredibly fond of. Specifically, I'm trying to find it here. in the Saturday Night Live clip with Jeff Goldblum and David Spade, the shelf behind, and again, like nobody working on a 1992 episode of Saturday Night Live is like, we need to really make sure that the entire section behind our characters is logical. They're just like, put the tapes up there. Who cares? Like, this is not for posterity. We're broadcasting this and then we're getting rid of it. But I'm trying to remember what it is, but I think it's like Full Metal Jacket is in the comedy section.
Yeah.
And you're just like, I'm enjoying this now in hindsight, now that I have this like high def SNL file. But you just know, and this is the thing that like you either know this about filmmaking or you don't. Like nobody on the day is thinking about this at all. Like it's just not a relevant part of why anybody is thinking while they're getting ready to shoot these scenes.
Yeah. And I feel like the weird thing is though, is that in that Hamlet clip, it almost works for me because he's delivering this soliloquy about like a really messy situation and really complex feelings, and the place he's walking through is kind of a mess.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that there's no world where that movie built that. That is obviously a blockbuster location on loan. So why the categories are different? Again, is it somebody looking at the frame and saying, I would just rather look at X box over Y box? Like, possibly. Or is there more to it than that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so here I found it. Um, Saturday Night Live mystery section, Full Metal Jacket and Jungle Fever. Like, those are someone just put those there thinking, get these, there's Scent of a Woman in horror.
Yeah.
Like, just get the movies on the shelf. Who cares?
And I mean
And that's fine.
the whole sketch revolves around like a copy of the verdict being in like this really ridiculous place where he would immediately know where it is on this high shelf,
Yeah,
like right near the counter where no one else could
right.
get to it.
But
It's
yeah,
the
looking at
entire
this
setup for the
Hamlet
joke.
clip, yeah, like why is Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much and The Third Man in the action section? Lolita, I'm seeing here, Dr. Zhivago in action. Like who knows? Who knows what the reason is? But all I hope is that over the span of the time people spend with this film, your eyes start trying to make those connections and that we teach you how to watch the frame, which is the way myself and the film's editor, Clyde, every time I've ever seen a scene cut into a video store, I'm doing exactly what you're describing. I'm looking at the category, I'm looking at what's on the shelf, I'm thinking, what is going on here?
And the last thing that I really wanted to talk to you about is kind of how the video store really is a strange melting pot of humanity. And I think the film speaks to all the different things that you can find in a video store. While they were predominantly thought of as places to get horror movies and adult films, I think the film also shows that there's always this tendency for people who work in them to have to be knowledgeable about every single thing someone in there could possibly come in there for. And I was just wondering for you what it's like to sort of make that known that these were places where everyone, regardless of income bracket, knowledge of film, taste, personal preference, would come together and oftentimes come back again and again, to a point where they do become regular customers.
What is my thought on that?
Yeah, to try to put something like that together, to try to capture just what a melting pot of these places were and kind of steer away from what you talk about in the film, which is that, they were seen as places to get horror movies and adult films.
Yeah, I mean, something that's the fulfillment of online movie watching is further proof that what film access was always reaching for was full democratization. Everybody has access to the same thing. You don't have to go to three stores to find something. They're not going to be out of the movie because that's impossible. You're renting it on a digital streaming service. But Um, we saw at Kim's every day. Some guy, if I'm being historically accurate, typically a black guy, would come in with a garbage bag full of DVDs he was trying to sell to us. And they were often the street bootlegs you would buy like on Canal Street or in the subway. And this is obviously not a regularly dramatized
Yeah.
practice. But what this means to me, and what we all know, you go to the movies, uh, New York City, anywhere, Times Square, going to the movies, at least, prior to the decline of that industry as well, was just a fully democratic process. And what you see with these guys who would come in with these garbage bags full of bootlegs is a core fact. Everybody wants to watch movies, at least, up to a certain point in recent American history. Not only did everybody want to watch them, but what we saw with these guys with the garbage bags full of bootlegs is everybody wanted to watch them at home. And everybody maybe wanted to own them. People wanted to see on the street a bootleg of a new movie, and rather than go to it, they wanted to watch it at home. So they bought a bootleg for $10 or whatever. And this was just fulfillment to me that there is no single line that people are moving on between their desire to watch a movie and how they can do it. Video is just one of those means that existed in so many different forms forever. Renting a tape, buying a tape, renting a DVD, buying a DVD, getting a bootleg, owning it, reselling it, getting it in the mail, Netflix. Like the story of the movie and the story of movie spectatorship over the last 40 years is just the story of how things are accessed. And things needed to be accessed evenly, or else they would only be accessible to a select few. That doesn't mean that every blockbuster everywhere in the country has to have a selection on par with Kim's Video, but it does mean that there needs to be a certain base level of storytelling available to everybody based on the understanding that no matter where people are, as we say early in the film, within 5 miles, 10 miles of whatever, people just need to get their hands on a movie to watch. They weren't renting TV shows on DVD at this time. They were renting movies, 2-hour movies. And the assumption of this massive, massive retail industry that existed for decades is no matter where you are, no matter who you are, Blockbuster, the grocery store, the gas station, everybody wants to take home a movie, watch it, and then return it. And for decades, that was true. And the movie traces that thought to the point where it is no longer true, where the modes of access, weirdly by becoming more dispersed, which is to say, uh, liberated from physical locations, sort of then becomes less accessible because now it's not curated and it's not a physical experience. It's just the endless digital spread of nothingness, which, yes, more access is better, but it's access devoid of context. And I
Mhm.
think the point for those of us who loved stores, shopped in them, worked in them, is access isn't everything. Context is everything.